Hello, this will be a demonstration of proposition 10 from book 10 of Euclid's Elements, which requires us to find two straight lines, the one incommensurable and the other incommensurable in square with a given straight line. All we have set out at the very beginning is some straight line. We're going to call it A. And what we want to do throughout the course of this proposition is to find two straight lines, one of which is incommensurable with A, it has no common measure with A, and the other of which is incommensurable in square with A. What that means is that if we put squares on those two straight lines, those squares will be incommensurable. So that's what incommensurable in square means. So our task is to find two straight lines, the one incommensurable with the given straight line A, and the other incommensurable in square with the given straight line A. We're going to begin by setting out two numbers, B and C. Now B and C, the only qualification that we make to them, B and C, those two numbers, B and C, they're set out only such that their ratio, the ratio of the number B to the number C, is not a ratio of two square numbers. So for example, they can't have a ratio of 4 and 9, or 9 and 16, or 9 and 25, because those would be ratios of square numbers. We're setting out the numbers B and C only with the qualification that their ratio is not a ratio of two square numbers. Next, we're going to set out a straight line D such that the square on A has to the square on D the ratio which the number B has to the number C. Now we learned how to do this according to the porism of proposition 10(6). How you would do, just very briefly, you would take a fourth proportional to the two numbers and the line A, and then you would take a mean proportional between those two lines. And then that mean proportional would be at the line D. That's just very brief. Refer back to proposition 10(6) if you would like more details. But for right now, we're just going to set out the straight line D such that the square on it has to the square on A the ratio which the number C has to the number B. So it's going to be like this. About. Okay. Now, because the number B does not have to the number C a ratio of two square numbers, and we also know, by virtue of how we define the line D, that the ratio of A squared to D squared is the same as that ratio of the number B to the number C, we can then also say that the ratio of A squared to D squared, the ratio of the square on A to the square on D, is also not a ratio of two square numbers. But if it's not a ratio of two square numbers, then what we can conclude, according to the previous proposition 10(9), is that the lines A and D are incommensurable. Part of what 10(9) tells us, there's again 4 parts to it, but one of those parts is that if the squares on two straight lines, two given straight lines, if those squares have a ratio that is not a ratio of two square numbers, then the sides of those squares, in other words, the given straight lines, are incommensurable. So we have that here. We have a ratio of two squares, A squared to D squared, which is not a ratio of two square numbers. And what we conclude from that is that A and D are incommensurable. So that's half of our proposition done, because we wanted to find a line that was incommensurable with A. And we've just found it in the line D. So next, we're going to set out another line, E, which will be a mean proportional to A and D. We can find it according to proposition 6(13). So I'm going to set out another line about yay long. And that line will be defined as a mean proportional to A and D. Or in other words, A will have to E the same ratio that E has to D. That's what a mean proportional is. So A is to E just as E is to D. Now, because A is to E just as E is to D, by definition, by stipulation of the line E, we can say, according to the porism of proposition 6(19), that the ratio of the first line A to the third line D is the same as the ratio of the square on the first line, A squared, to the square on the second line, E squared. So A is to D just as A squared is to E squared. But you'll remember from step 2, we had shown that A and D were incommensurable. So what follows from that, according to proposition 10(11), is that A squared and E squared are also incommensurable, which then means that the lines A and E are incommensurable in square. Because again, What it means for two lines to be incommensurable in square is that the squares on them are incommensurable. So we've just shown that a squared and e squared, those are incommensurable. So a and e are incommensurable in square. So we have done that which we set out to do. We set out to find two straight lines, one of which was incommensurable with a, the other of which was incommensurable in square with a, and we have just found them in the lines D and E. We have found two straight lines, D and E. They've been found such that D is incommensurable with the given straight line A, and E is incommensurable in square with the given straight line A. So having done that which we set out to do, we are done with the proposition QEF. Now, the proposition in itself is straightforward, but there are reasons to suspect, as our translator Heath says, there are reasons to suspect that this proposition does not originate from Euclid. There's a phrase in it that is uncharacteristic of the elements. It's only found in this one proposition in the elements, but more damning, I think, is the fact that in step 4, you may have laughed at or giggled, I had to pause when I read this, is that in step 4, we cite proposition 1011 to say that because A is to D just as A squared is to E squared, and A is incommensurable with D, A squared is also therefore incommensurable with E squared. We can know that according to proposition 1011, but 1011 of course comes after 1010, and this is again the only spot where Euclid uses a proposition written later to demonstrate an earlier proposition. So there are reasons to suspect that this proposition does not originate from Euclid. Heath's idea is that this proposition is put in place to justify a statement in definition 10.3. Definition 10.3 has a statement about with any given line, there's an infinity of lines that are commensurable and incommensurable, and commensurable and square, and incommensurable and square with it. So this proposition 1010, he thinks was put in by perhaps a later student or a later editor to justify that statement in definition 10.3. So it's cool for that reason. I like that. Because without this proposition, that statement in definition 10.3 is unjustified, frankly. But as I already mentioned, this probably didn't come from Euclid. That doesn't mean it's not true. Not everything that's true has to come from Euclid, but this proposition probably didn't come from Euclid. So with that said, that's all I've got to say about this proposition. I think the logic straightforward enough, but if there's any questions about it, I did kind of run through it quickly. If there are any questions about it, comment box is always open. It would be a pleasure to help anyone. So with that said, I will end the video here and prove the next proposition used in this one. In the next video, I will demonstrate proposition 1011.